The enrichment process, the metadata that's added to the data as it comes into the archive is really important.
Hi everybody, welcome to the third in our series of videos on digital preservation. This week I'm joined by my colleague again, Mark Smith, and we're discussing accessibility of data when it's been retained in these archives. Hi Mark, so we've just discussed the importance of digital preservation, sort of the methodology associated to it, but I guess a key question we get asked by customers all the time is if you're putting a data into a long-term, maybe like a glacial type archive, how it's marked and how it's retrieved, and I guess utilising that data.
I mean, the first step is to get that data together. So we can have data from all sorts of different sources. In our experience of the customers we work with, they'll have some sort of archive that they believe is a digital preservation repository, but they'll also have a selection of data and media dotted around their business, sometimes even on USB drives, sometimes on endpoints and people's personal computing devices that has a bearing or should be in part of the digital preservation solution. So once you bring all of those different types of data together, you need to try and understand where those pieces of data came from, the relevance of that data, and indeed try and understand what you're keeping that data for. So we talk about markers, we talk about metadata, and enriching the archive by the way that you ingest the data. So we'll work, an archive or the preservation archive is a central repository for all of your data that you need to keep for a long period of time. And that could be data that's accessed by a wide selection of different applications. And in fact, if you bring it all together in one place, you want as many of your applications to use that one preservation repository as possible, because you'll get the best benefit from it. So the enrichment process, the metadata that's added to the data as it comes into the archive is really important, because otherwise you'll just have a collection of files and no one will know exactly what those files are for. You can't put meaningful data into file names for too long before you run out of space in a file name. So we add metadata tags, and depending on the application you use, it can be simple metadata tags that are just part of the properties fields, if you like, if you see them in files, right through to a separate database of metadata that refers to the files inside the database. So it's about the application and how the application wants to interpret the metadata in the store.
So I guess a key role for CAE when supporting its customers is not only creating the archive, the platform, but I guess layering the appropriate application to make sure that the data is accessible. And something I've noticed when we're dealing with customers in digital preservation is we traditionally deal with technical people, but actually the people that want to utilise the data within a preservation environment are generally non-technical people. We often deal with, say, galleries as an example, who are ingesting or digitising physical assets into a digital format, and they want to be able to retrieve them and view them in the future, but those are non-technical people. So I guess it's a different audience for us and a different to the applications give the accessibility.
Yeah, in a gallery type environment, in a cultural preservation repository, it'll be the archivists that care about the works and the media that have been created. And in a scientific environment, it'll be the scientists, but what you will see is they care about the individual items, but they don't care about the technology, they don't care about so much the application, they care about the works or the pieces of science or the pieces of data, and they need the workflow to fit them. They don't particularly want to fit into a workflow that doesn't work for their particular, field. So scientists want the data to be easily accessible, but they also want it to feed in and out of their devices, their machines, the technology they use to generate that data. And likewise, you'll also see multiple applications talking to one repository, because you'll use different applications for different types of data. So it's really common in a cultural heritage type environment to have one application dealing with photo static works, and then you'll have a completely different preservation application dealing with video and audio works, because they're treated and indexed and cleaned and tidied in different ways when they come into the archive.
So something we've discussed earlier was integrity of data. So okay, if data's been retrieved, I guess again part of this preservation process is make sure the data's not changed in the retrieval. So maybe a second copy goes down if something's been amended, but the original copy is never changed. So that integrity is a big part of, again, importing the data, maintaining the data, making it accessible, but I guess ensuring there's no change to the fundamental, the source, the original source. The key takeaways again for this week: integrity of data is vital.
Yep.
I guess we utilise applications so we can mark the data, so we can retrieve it.
Enriching the data.
Given that accessibility. And I guess consideration of the ultimate size of the, as you say, of the archive, because you say you're keeping that original copy, which is can be incredibly rich. It can be incredibly large in scale.
Absolutely, yeah. I think going into we see it quite regularly. We'll start on a project, we'll get a scope for a project. The project will be a great success, and suddenly we get a load more workload that appears out from another department or another team. So making sure that, and I would use the term technology cul-de-sac. We don't suggest technology that's going to reach a limit that we can conceive the customer might reach. So expandable solutions, scalable solutions, and flexible solutions, I think, are really important in digital preservation.
And you've touched on it very briefly there, but there's industry standards. So we obviously, as CAE, we operate to industry standards because there's a preservation sort of process to follow.
Yes, so the 321 rules, is a really common standard of 3 copies of the data, 2 physical pieces of hardware. Because you've got to remember, if the data's so big we can't back it up, then we have multiple copies, and one of them or multiple of them are immutable, so they can't be changed, and then you have a working copy somewhere else. But if we can't back it up, we need it on separate hardware as well. So we need to protect ourselves against some sort of hardware corruption. So we would typically have 2 different types of hardware. And maybe we'd have 2 repositories on one piece of hardware and a third piece of hardware. So that if a code or a piece of software, a piece of firmware could affect the stability of the data or the validity of the data, then we have a completely separate platform that we can go back to that won't be affected because they're completely separate paths.
Fantastic. I'm sure for everybody, really, what you've explained today is these projects are ones we need to talk. It's not a project. We obviously get sent requests and requirements often, but these digital preservation projects are very engaged. We need to work with the customer to find the requirements and tease out the actual outcome.
Yeah, they're tough. In the public sector, you see lots of tenders, and tenders are a difficult way of engaging with the customer around a solution because it's got to be an open dialogue. We need to really understand what's driving the project rather than I need a petabyte of digital preservation. We need to understand why you need a petabyte and what are you driving to. And a consultative approach, I think, is a much better way to drive a correct solution rather than a close solution. And we see customers with an idea of what it's going to look like, but we get involved and we talk to them, we understand what works really well for other customers, our experience, our work with our partner organisations and the application owners to change some of those requirements, because actually a lot of our customers, they know what a digital preservation platform means to them, but they don't quite understand how that relates to the applications they're going to use, the protection of the data, and sometimes they're not actually aware of like having it on 2 platforms seems like a really good idea. So we talk to them about that, and I think it's a really consultative approach is the best way to tease out the full requirement. Otherwise we might just end up with a project that doesn't deliver everything the customer wanted. And archiving as something that has been around for a long, long time, I dread to think how many customers have embarked on an archiving project only to realise that they didn't have a full conversation with the whole of the business to understand what they wanted from it, and have ended up changing their archiving solution. And when we're talking about storing data in a digital preservation solution, as we said, it's 25 to 100 years. So we don't really want to be making changes to the data formats and to the way we're storing the data. Changes to the applications are going to happen, but changes to the data we don't want. And that's why we need to make sure that we get us involved, talk to us early, and let's start talking about how your preservation solution is going to I guess, benefit your business, so we can make sure we explore all the avenues.
Thank you, Mark. It's a fantastic place to finish this week's conversation. We look forward to expanding in the coming weeks. Thank you.